Sorry, the microphone is a little weird, but yes, okay. Let me start. Our talk is about revisiting register contrast in MON and its production and perception study. So first of all, what is register contrast? Register contrast is a contrast usually binary, typically marked by multiple phonetic properties. And by saying it usually binary, the name of the two registers are usually called high register and low register, or sometimes head register and chest register. So for the case of high register, there are several multiple phonetic properties, including F0, voice quality, and vowel quality. And for the high register, you would have higher F0, tense or modal voice quality, and then more open, more peripheral, and shorter vowel quality. And for the low register, you would have lower F0, lax or breathy voice quality, more close and more centralized, or longer vowel quality. So I have some sounds that I hope I can play. So this is an example from MON of high and low register. So this is high register. Can you hear it fine there?
I think the sound was not very loud. I couldn't really hear all that much. But,
Oh, I see. It's fine. So these are two registers, but you will hear that there's a difference mostly in the F0 and voice quality and maybe a little bit of vowel quality. I mean, yeah. So that's register contrast. And in previous studies, languages may have different realizations of register. So it has been reported different languages have different realization. And usually one property is typically identified as most salient. So for example, in case of Gui and Eastern Jam, it has been reported that F0 is the most salient property. Or in a language like Canterbury Khmer or Southern Yi, vowel quality has been reported as the most salient property. Interestingly, that voice quality is rarely identified as the most salient correlate. So one language that can say that that has been reported to have voice quality as the main correlate is MON, which is the focus of our talk today. So MON is a prototypical register language. It is an Austroasiatic language spoken mainly in Myanmar and Thailand. And similar to other Austroasiatic languages, MON register developed from onset voicing in the previous stage of the language. But in terms of phonetic description of the register, they tend to vary quite a bit. First description says that MON register is a phonation type contrast. So for example, Shorto in 1967 said that MON register even have, for MON register, pitch difference as an exponent of register is actually lacking. So no pitch difference. Or in some studies says that MON register is actually a pitch contrast. For example, for Lee in 1983 said that the most significant parameter of the register distinction in MON is that of pitch. And in even some studies says that not just pitch and phonation type, but MON also has vowel quality difference and have a suggestion that MON register is being restructured into vowel contrast. So for example, in Baer in 2018 said that if contrastive phonation types disappear in the future, MON may retain diphthongs as salient parameters and then develop into a restructured language. This is similar to the case of Khmer, for example. But we know from phonetic literature that pitch and phonation type, for example, are usually not independent. So for the quote here, for example, from Wayland and Yeoman said that during the production of breathy phonation type, the vocal folds actually have to be relatively taut. Thus, the F0 of breathy vowel is expected to be lower than that of clear vowel. So you select the vocal folds to produce breathy phonation, and that would yield lower F0 anyway. Or Abramson in 2015 also said similar things, that F0 difference in MON register is an automatic consequence of the difference of laryngeal control for phonation types. And what it means here, which leads us to our study, we think that for MON register, we actually need, MON register actually needs to be studied in both production and perception. So for many reasons, as we have described, first of all, there's a conflicting conclusions on the phonetic properties of MON register. And many studies focus on identifying single most salient properties, but register likely reflects a constellation of correlated acoustic features arise from specific laryngeal settings as well. So we want to dive into that. And moreover, in terms of perception, to understand the relative importance of these cues, we must also go beyond acoustic analysis and include perception experiments that manipulate each property independently as well to understand it further. So coming to our research questions, we have two main research questions. One is, what are the phonetic correlates of register contrast in MON in the production? And the second one is, what are the phonetic correlates of register contrast in MON in the perception? So first, we start with the production study. For the question of the production, we have looked into the previous literature, and we found here's the list of what people have talked about MON register. So in phonetic studies, it has shown that high register exhibit higher F0 than low register, with different studies reported different degrees of effect size. Some studies said that it's very small, as like maybe just a byproduct of something else, or some studies said that it's large enough to be something similar to a tone language. And in terms of voice quality, it has been reported that low register exhibit breathier voice quality, but some studies actually failed to find voice quality difference at all in MON. And finally, in terms of vowel quality, it has been reported that vowel quality difference is significant only for some vowels. So it's not as systematic as voice quality or F0 in some that has been reported. So come to our study, we have done acoustic and electroglottographic, or EGG, data collection from 17 native speakers of MON. And these are Burma MON from Burma. And the words are the simile are monosyllabic and final syllable are polysyllabic words. It has been embedded in a sentence to make it slightly more natural. And here are the examples of word lists. So we try to have word lists that contains minimal pairs or near minimal pairs for most case. Here are the example. I don't know if I can play it. I'll play one. This is an example of the stimuli that we have. I don't know if you can hear it, but that's the high register. Okay. And we have the low register. I can send it to you if you want to hear it later on after this. So after we collected the data, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. After we collected the data, we have done the register. Well, we have done some measurements to the signals, which by using Pratt saws, which measure the acoustic measurements, and Pratt-Det that would measure the open portion of the EGG signal. So for the measurements, we have measured F0 that represents pitch, and we measure F1 and F2 representing vowel quality. And then we measure the spectral tilt, specifically H1 minus A3, and we measure cepstral peak prominence from the acoustic signal, and we measure the open quotient. So what is the ratio of the closing and opening of the vocal folds coming from the EGG signal. So we measure these strings that represent voice quality, so 3 dimensions. And with these trajectories of the measurements that we have done, we fit these trajectories using FPCA, or functional principal component analysis. So we're not going to go into details here, but functional principal component analysis of FPCA is a curve fitting technique that would give you scores, which we call here PC scores, that represent the shape of the trajectories. So yeah. And in terms of fitting the FPCA, we fit 3 correlates of register as we have described. So we have one model that fit only F0 trajectories that represent pitch, and the second model fitting F1 and F2 to formant frequencies trajectories to represent vowel quality, and the third one we fit the 3 measurements that represent voice quality. And once we get the PC scores, we use the PC scores as a dependent variables in the linear mixed effect models, with the independent variable of register, which is between high and low register. And then we have random intercept and random slope of subject. So that's the technical part of this. So coming to the result, we found that only F0 and voice quality are systematically different across registers, while vowel quality is different for only some vowels. And here are some plots of what the trajectories look like. So for high register, we found that high register exhibits higher F0 than low register, as we would expect. So in this plot, we see the blue line that represents high register having higher F0 compared to the orange line that represents the F0 trajectories of the low register. And in terms of voice quality, we found that low register is breathier, which from this plot, it shows that low register, which is in orange, exhibit a lower CPP, so more aperiodic noise in the signal. And we have higher H1 minus A3, which also represents the breathy phonation type. And then we also have higher open quotient from EGG signals, which means that the vocal folds is more open in the during the vibration. So this all points towards low register being breathier. So in summary, and once we already know that F0 and voice quality actually are the main correlates of register for MON, we ask further question of, are the two correlates actually produced independently, or do they actually covary in systematic way? As we have said in the beginning, that they are actually not independent in our understanding. So we did fit, we applied multi-dimensional FPCA to both F0 and voice quality. So we fit 4 measurements, 4 trajectories: F0, H1 minus A3, CPP, and open quotient. And if we fit this and we see that these 4 trajectories actually co-varies, if they actually co-varies, the PC curves of all dimensions will vary together. And here's what we found. So we found that these are the variations of the trajectories. And we found that if we have higher F0 than the mean, we will also have higher CPP, lower H1 minus A3, and lower open quotient, which correspond nicely to high register. It's also true the other way around. When we have lower F0, the signal would also have lower CPP, higher H1 minus A3, and higher open quotient, which points more towards low register. So in other words, FPCA shows that F0 and voice quality actually co-varies. Lower F0 correspond with breathier voice quality. So coming back to our research question, so what are the phonetic correlates of registers? In terms of production, we found that F0 and voice quality measures are systematically different across registers. So high register have high F0 and more modal voice quality, and low register has lower F0 and breathy voice quality. But we cannot actually conclude that F0 voice quality are the most salient property, because as we have shown, F0 and voice quality co-vary systematically and show comparable effect sizes. This contrasts with the earlier claims that pitch was marginal or absent. But it is in line with Diphlot's view that the salience of register features cannot be determined from acoustic alone, which leads us to the second part of our analysis of our study, which is the perception study. So the perception study, we asked the question of what are the phonetic correlates of register in MON in perception. So in previous studies, there have been claimed that voice quality is the most readily perceived cue to MON listeners. And there has only been one actual perception study of the language, but the experiment was that they have recordings of MON speakers producing the 2 registers and asked MON native speakers to distinguish the 2 registers. So it actually, there was no investigation on which is the important cue that MON listeners actually relied on to distinguish registers. So nothing got manipulated in that, which leads us to our study here. We did run a forced choice identification task. So we basically have participants listening to stimuli, which we manipulated different parameters in the signal and asked them to say what this words actually means. We have 2 choices, as you can see in here. So we ran this study with 29 native speakers, and we asked them to choose between the 2 signals, the 2 words, which are the high register and the words with the low register. So we have 2 sets of stimuli. And the parameters that we have manipulated are 5 steps of F0 trajectories, as you can see in this figure, 3 steps of F1, representing high vowels, the height of the vowel. And then we also manipulated open quotient, which is the parameter that we can set in the synthesis of the stimuli. And we have 3 steps of open quotient from less breathy to more breathy. And we fit the responses of the participants as a dependent variable of mixed effect logistic regression. And we have F0, F1, and F open quotient steps that we have manipulated and their interactions as independent variable. And then we have random intercept and slope of subject. And for the results, we found that listeners actually relied mainly on pitch, and while voice quality and vowel quality played a role only when pitch is ambiguous. So I'll unpack this a little bit slowly. So first of all, in terms of the result that listeners relied mainly on pitch to distinguish high and low register, we show this in this plot. Basically, the y-axis is a proportion of high register response. So if you have the values closer to 1, it means that participant tends to judge this stimuli as high register stimuli. And if it's low, it means that it is judged more towards low register stimuli. And on the x-axis, it's the F0 trajectory F0 steps that of each stimuli, so from low to high. So in terms of result, we found that stimuli with low F0 tends to be judged as low register, and stimuli with high register, which is to the right of the plot here, tends to be judged as high register. And this is consistent with the production results. So then we move on to the part where we say that voice quality and F1 is used only when F0 is ambiguous. So we have a new plot here. This is a heat map that shows 2 dimensions. So this is the F0, the same, which is from low F0 to high register to high F0. And for the open quotient, we have the high open quotient to the low open quotient in the top here, which the high open quotient represents low register, and here represents high register. So what we want to point out here is that when F0 is in the mid-range, which is in these 3 columns here, breathier stimuli tends to be judged as low register. So the color that is representing each cell here, if it's more white, it means that it tends more to be a low register. And if it's darker, it means it tends to be judged as high register. So you can see that when it is in the mid-range, breathier stimuli tend to be low register, so it's lighter in terms of color, compared to when it is like in a less breathy stimuli. Up here, it tends to be judged as high register. As you can see that these 3 cells have a darker color compared to these 3 cells. Same stories with the F1. So when stimuli with higher vowel tends to be judged as low register, and stimuli with lower vowels tend to be judged as high register, as you compare from the color shades of the top and the bottom row. And interestingly, listeners also tended to prioritize F0 over voice quality and vowel quality when cues were conflicted. So when you actually have high F0, even though the open quotient and F1 actually points more towards low register, participants still judge it as high register based on the high value of F0. Same stories when you actually have low F0, even though the open quotient and F1 actually points more towards high register, participants still judge it as low register because they base on F0 more. So to answer the second research questions, listeners actually relied on pitch, voice quality, and vowel quality for some vowels to distinguish high and low registers. But pitch was the most salient cue, and voice quality and vowel quality played a role only when pitch is ambiguous. And to answer both research questions, in terms of production, we found that only F0 and voice quality is systematically different across register, while vowel quality is different for some vowels. And for perception, listeners actually relied mainly on pitch, while voice quality and vowel quality played a role only when pitch is ambiguous. So you may ask a question of why our findings actually are different from some of the previous studies. We have some hypothesis, which is that maybe due to different dialects, our participants are Burma Mon speakers from Burma, while many of the previous studies actually worked with Thai Mon speakers who are in Thailand and are bilingual in Thai and Mon. Or another possibility is that there may be a possible shift in cue weighting due to sound change. This is because we collected data last year and other studies collected data a few many years ago. So there may be sound change happening in Mon as well. And in terms of future directions, there have been reported that actually register in Mon would only have phonation type difference in connected speech, and pitch difference would be superseded by intonation. So pitch is not the properties of register in connected speech, which we have actually didn't look at yet because our study mainly is more on the lab speech. But it is interesting to look at connected speech, whether this claim that Deflot has put out in 1985 is actually hold in the modern Mon dialect. And finally, our study actually didn't control for vowel quality all that well. So maybe a more systematic study of vowel quality across register would be important to show as well, like whether register actually has an effect on all vowels or only some vowels, as we have seen in our experiment. And that's all we have. Thank you very much for your attention. We have already published this. So if you want to read the full story of this, here's the name of the paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt, and Patrick, and James too. Now we have some time for questions. I don't see any questions yet in the chat, so I will ask a question first regarding the 17 speakers from Burma. Mm-hmm. Were those all from the same area, or were those from different areas in Burma?
They're actually from different areas in Burma, but one interesting thing is that we didn't see much of difference in terms of F0 and voice quality, but there are some difference in vowel quality, which we are investigating right now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I see that Alexis Michaud has raised his hand. So you can ask your question, Alexis.
Yes, thank you very much. Could you return to slide 31, please? The question is about the term ambiguous. When you said, when F0 is ambiguous, then people would rely on other cues. Mm-hmm. And on slide 31, you have the results for F0. Yes, that's it. And it seems that there's no obvious ceiling effect, is it? That, after a certain threshold, that when you get above 160, 170, well, it would be unambiguous, right? That it has to be high register. And that at the, bottom level, you would have an unambiguous answer just based on F0 alone. But it seems that the values here are not that extreme, are they? So that's the question.
You mean in terms of the response?
Exactly. So the question is, what would you consider as an unambiguous F0 for high register and low register?
It is difficult to say in terms of, let's say, like the absolute values of F0 in terms of hertz, because these things are relative anyway. I forgot to say that the stimuli is based on a male speaker, and it's based on the range of the male speaker, which is our pilot participant. So it's difficult to say what exactly is the range that we would say ambiguous and unambiguous. We just base mainly on the fact that there are the mid-range of in the middle of the range that we have. So 130 is the lowest is the mean value of the low register that we got from that model participant, and 170 is the number that we got from the model participant. And in terms of response, why we didn't get, let's say, 1, which means that all participants answer as high register, or 0, which all participants answer as low register. Mm-hmm. Part of it, I think, is because some participants actually didn't do well with the task. It's unfortunate, but some participants actually didn't. It's not, maybe it's not because participants didn't do well with the task, but maybe the manipulation that we did didn't sound natural to them enough for them to be able to distinguish clearly. But definitely, the majority of participants actually managed to distinguish it. They said that it sounds natural to them, but maybe for some participant didn't manage to do well, maybe it didn't sound natural enough to them, for example.
Thanks very much for the
I hope I answered the question.
additional insights into the experimental setup and these beautiful data. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat. I don't see. Seems like no one has raised their hand. Then okay, then I will ask another question regarding vowel qualities. You said that you know, vowel qualities were only, there were differences only for some vowels, right? Do you have something to say, something more to say about like which vowels were showing differences? Which of the vowels?
Yeah, so we didn't put it on the slides because we didn't have enough time to present everything. But we mostly use the data of the non-high vowels, so in those range. I mean, vowel system of Mon is very complex. But what we found that is a difference is the back vowel, the A, fifth A. This is what we see the difference, which is also our stimuli here. So we see the difference for, we see a small difference for this vowel, but we didn't see the difference on this vowel. But as we have said in our production study, we didn't control and balance all vowel quality in a way that is systematic enough for us to make a conclusion whether vowel actually plays a role systematically for register, or is it something else that has an effect on the vowel that makes it different across register.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'm surprised Ryan doesn't have any questions. But,
we can talk more, Ryan.
If no one has questions, maybe we can conclude here. Thank you one more time to Matt and the other two people who conducted the study. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.